Welcome to Communist Radio. I'm Fiona, and today I'm joined by Lubna and Lotta and Lubna, and we're doing this podcast to mark International Women's Day, which was actually originally International Working Women's Day, which you'd be forgiven for not knowing because not many people know about it. And that's because the origins of this day are radical. They're even revolutionary. This day was started by communists. It was actually proposed by a German communist called Clara Zetkin, who's quite well known. She was quite influential in the communist movement. And there was kind of a conference of the Second International, and she put forward this idea. You guys know this, but I'm telling you again. She put forward this idea to have a day to mark the cause for women's suffrage, for women's rights, just to advance the cause of working class women, and it should be internationally celebrated. This was in 1910, so a long time ago. She put this forward and it was unanimously accepted, I think, at the conference. Therefore, International Women's Day was born. And the question of women's liberation is something that has always been discussed and taken very seriously by communists and by Marxists. Clara Zetkin and Lenin had a lot of back and forth on the topic, for example. There's so much literature, Marxist literature on this topic that I would invite listeners to go and look at. But the first thing we're trying to do here is reclaim this day as communists. It's radical, not just because of this socialist conference that spoke about it, but actually it went on to be the birth of the Russian Revolution as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I really think that this day has such a revolutionary history, basically, and legacy. Yeah. And it's like you say, the Russian Revolution, it started on International Working Women's Day. And it wasn't like the Bolshevik knew that, okay, this is the day we're going to go out and so on. They might have planned to, produce some leaflets and so on, do some propaganda meetings, etc. But it was the women in the textile factories that went out on strike that day. And it was because that the war, the First World War was taking place. There was enormous amount of suffering that was happening. Women, on the one hand, had to work long hours in the factories, at the same time taking care of all of the burden of the domestic housework, etc. Their husbands were often sent to the front, being slaughtered in the war. And it had got to a point where, they had enough. So they called, a meeting in the textile factory and decided to go out on strike. And it didn't just stop there. What they did was they sent out delegation to all of the factories nearby and to literally drag out the men and get them to come and join the strike. Yeah. And I think it's an important point to make here because women, not just in the Russian Revolution, but we've seen this throughout history. They play a crucial role in revolutions. And this is not a coincidence. It is because that women who are oppressed, they have the most to gain if a revolution is successful, but also most to lose if it doesn't win. So, they do play a very, very important role. And you see it also throughout the first few days of the February Revolution in 1917. They play a crucial role in leading the struggle, basically, helping the fraternizations of soldiers coming over to the side of the workers and so on. And 5 days later, after 8th of March, you had the Tsar regime completely collapse, basically. And then 9 months later, you have the Bolshevik coming to power on the back of the revolution. And that really changed everything, It's such an amazing part of our legacy.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? Women were literally seen as property, in Tsarist, under the Tsarist regime. And for women to go out and fight, this is obviously a very heroic and an amazing feat, basically. And it wasn't just sort of like a strike or a movement, and that was it. They actually succeeded, right, through the Bolshevik Revolution to actually overthrow the Tsarist regime. And in that way, thanks to the Bolsheviks, obviously managed to succeed in the revolution and to install a planned economy. And because of that, you saw amazing gains, right, for women. I mean, for example, like, as I said, women were seen as property. So they had to literally change the entire relationship between men and women. And that can only really be achieved by, laying down the basis also on an economic front, right? So, like, for example, they were providing like a social changes, such as like mass laundrettes were socialized, canteens were like nationalized for people, for families to go and eat, so women are not tied to the home, to free childcare, obviously, and then obviously on top of that, you also had like rights given to women to, for example, divorce, which was not the case before. Even like if a woman wanted to divorce and she didn't have the economic means to find a different home, she was provided with one for like at least 6 months or so. So she can also escape, for example, domestic abuse if that was the case. And also like, free meals for children in schools, all sorts of amazing things. But also the right for abortion, for example, which was as early given as in like 1924, if I'm correct, something like that. Maybe even earlier. But anyway, amazing gains, like maybe 1918 even. I don't know.
I think so,
1918. Yeah. So yeah, amazing gains, which also like the Bolsheviks tried to also emphasize, like, women are not just choosing for abortion lightly. It comes out of this whole necessity. If a society cannot provide, children with the basic means of life, and women are being abused and they have no economic like independence, then like what are they bringing this child into? It will also cause them misery. It will cause the women misery, the family. It's not something that is chosen lightly. And so the Bolsheviks were saying we actually need to not just give them the rights, but also change the conditions in which families and children are being brought up in society. And so that was all achieved. And actually the statistics are amazing. Like, child mortality went from like 28% in 1913 to only halved basically to 14% in 1925. And that was all thanks to, of course, the working class seizing power, thanks to, laying down the planned economy that wasn't, all about, profit anymore, basically.
Yeah, what you said about the Bolsheviks actually understanding and looking at the conditions that women were in before, or like in order to work out what was necessary to improve their lives, is so important. And it's so important for us as communists to start with that, because it's so in contrast to the way that modern liberal feminism talks about the liberation of women. And even when you talk about abortion rights, is such a good example of this, because how is abortion spoken about today? It's all about the right to choose. And of course, we're in favor of the right for women to choose to have an abortion if they want it. But it is not a free choice. It is not a free choice that is being taken under capitalism, given the stranglehold that produces in someone's conditions. If you cannot afford rent or food, then how can you freely choose whether or not you can have a child? There's a whole host of different things, but it was really important for us to start this discussion by highlighting those real material gains that women, made in the Russian Revolution. Because, it really feels that the way liberal feminists talk about this kind of thing today, it's all cosmetic, it's all rhetoric, and it's all representation. And that, I think, is epitomized so much in the likes of Hillary Clinton. The obsession with what her becoming president of the United States was going to do for women was crazy. And it was I was about to say hysterical, but not the best word, but it was delusional, actually. The way in which that was presented, as though it would be a victory for all women everywhere, which it would not be. The entrance of like bourgeois women into positions of power does not improve the conditions of the working class, because they will continue to attack the working class, both men and women. But we've had, for the last couple of years, just a deluge of this kind of stuff. Hillary Clinton was, a huge example of this. They also did it with Kamala Harris a bit. Like, hey, we didn't get Hillary, but Kamala's going to do it. That was really, really promoted. And also, I really remember in 2015, I think it was, when Justin Trudeau, who's the Prime Minister in Canada, when he first won, and his cabinet was 50% women, and he gets asked in a press conference something like, why did you do that? Or what's your comment on this? And he's like, because it's 2015. And I'm not gonna, I ate it off at the time. Like, at the time, it was like, wow, it is 2015. We should have. But the point is, every single one of these people, I mean, Hillary Clinton didn't win, but even if she did win, she would not have improved the conditions of working class women. And where the Liberals and Justin Trudeau or whoever it is have gotten into power, they have attacked working class women. And that is true in Britain. I mean, we now have the Labour government, and we have Rachel Reeves, who is the first female chancellor in Britain, which she made a massive deal out of. And Angela Rayner, obviously Prime Minister, Prime Minister, I don't know. She is a working class woman, and they make a massive, massive deal out of it.
Single mum.
And she had the child quite young, I think.
Something like that.
And yet the Labour budget, which includes austerity, which includes the child benefit, cap on child benefit, taking away the winter fuel allowance, this is going
Pensions
to this is going to really negatively impact working class women on a massive scale. And for a whole host of different reasons, women are the worse off when austerity hits. And so this stuff is really nauseating, actually. And not only is it just nauseating to see, it actually creates the breeding ground for other really reactionary politics and ideas to start to move into that space, because you can't for years shove this down people's throats, this cosmetic representative politics, as though it is impacting working class women, whilst attacking them and expect no kind of backlash.
I think actually what you're saying is completely right when you look at like Kamala Harris, right? Because that's the thing, Hillary Clinton and Biden actually got more votes from women than Kamala Harris. And I don't think that this is an accident, right? Like, women are so, they actually see the complete bankruptcy of the previous governments in supporting them. They've done nothing and actually have even rewinded or taken back a lot of rights, like abortion rights and things like this, right? And of course, conditions have worsened so much more. What they want is actually real sort of that class anger is coming out, right? And Trump is precisely the sort of person that is able to tap into this again, right? And what they were looking for was not the same government as they had before that has done nothing for them. So I feel like the mask is sort of falling off for liberalism, and they're looking for something else, and they're angry. And I feel like it's a real reflection of how, whilst Kamala Harris was talking all about abortion and wanted to sort of also tap into this anger amongst women, she completely failed because she had no actual class politics or real answers to offer.
This point about the Democrats and abortion is so important, because women don't trust you anymore, because for years they used the issue of abortion. They dangled it over women in America and said, that's why you should vote for us, because we're going to enshrine this. And they never did. And so why would people believe them? This is the point. You cannot trust these people. We have no trust in the liberals to act as a safeguard for women's rights. Also because we know, as Marxists, as communists, that they don't actually really understand women's liberation, how it relates to capitalism, why therefore it's rooted in the class struggle. So they designate the struggle to the battle of ideas that plays out in the media or in dramatic things. There's this viral video of this Australian politician, and she's having a showdown with this man, and she's like, I will not be lectured on misogyny by this man. That was atrocious. I'm so sorry. But the point is that goes viral on TikTok. all the time. And I get it, it's nice to see someone kind of like fighting a bit for you, which is also why people like Trump, right? He's seen as a fighter. But at the end of the day, that is not how oppression takes place. Oppression is a real material thing that affects people's lives. It affects their conditions. Yeah. It does affect our interpersonal relationships and so on, which we can come on to later. But it's so important to not separate it out to this kind of, like showdown thing, which is how the liberal feminists see it, because they don't actually understand where it comes from and how working class women are actually oppressed.
No, exactly. They see it as like it's a result of very unfortunate behaviors or unfortunate norms that exist in society. And it's something that, it's just there basically. And the way you fight it is just to challenge these norms, to change language or representation, quota system, all of these kind of things basically. But the question is like, it's not like we don't think that these norms and these behaviors do exist. They do. But the question is, where does it come from? It doesn't just fall from the sky. Yeah. And it's not a thing that men are just born with. It's not inherently a thing that men, the day they are born, they come out and they are horrible pricks, basically. It's obviously the way that it's society that shapes people. And actually, like women's oppression is something that has not always existed. It is the oldest form of oppression. But we can see it, how it was developing when you saw the emergence of first classes and private property. And it came out of the need in a material need for men to control women's body and specifically control the women that she was giving birth to and making sure that those children was his. So that the private property, the surplus value could be then inherited to his children when he had passed and stayed within the family for the next generations. So sexualized violence, men's powers over women, it has, since the emergence of private property, that is where its origins comes from, It's by keeping women financially dependent on the man, where he has throughout class society, been literally seeing his wife as private property, where he controls her body and so on. And so these gender roles that we see today, they have not just fell from the sky, where men are viewed as providers and women are viewed as loving mothers, taking care of the home, etc. They reflect the very real roles that men and women have had throughout thousands of years. And they are, as you say, they are rooted in class societies. Now, obviously, like women's position today during capitalism is not completely the same to what it was when the first class society started. And it's mainly two reasons why the capitalist system still bases itself on oppression. And one of the first reasons is that it is massively profitable for the capitalists to have oppression. And that is because they can use it to exploit the overall working class. It's very useful to have different groups in societies that can be seen as unskilled workers, and they can use those groups to hold down wages, hold down conditions for everyone. For example, they can say to a man, being like, if you don't take this salary, if you don't have these conditions, then we're going to put a woman who's going to do it for lesser money and so on. So you better just like it, basically. And that is how they use it. You see how they do that with migrants, for example, and so on. And that's the thing, like they don't have any kind of real interest in trying to for example, level out the pay gap and so on, because it's very useful that women are generally paid less than men, basically, because they can use it as a way to lower conditions and wages for everyone.
On the downward, the gender pay gap is a really important thing, because the way that it's spoken about often by liberal feminists and so on and so forth, is as though it's just an attitude question of the men involved, and that if you can change, if they viewed women better, they would just pay them more. Or on the flip side, that women should be stronger,
assertive. Like Jordan Peterson.
There's this famous interview with Jordan Peterson and the Sky News presenter where he says, well, all the studies show that women who are more aggressive or less agreeable, I think the less agreeable get paid more, and that's the way forward. So, which is just again, it's designating it all to this kind of attitude, morality, and so on and so forth. But as you've explained, there's actually a profit interest that guides the way in which the gender pay gap takes place. Of course, there are cultural and ideological aspects to it, but it is not the central feature. You can't use that as the route forward.
No, exactly. And it's like, you have mechanisms within capitalism that is keeping women's wages and conditions lower. For example, women are mostly the group that is having to take part-time work or forced to do so. Or like having to do most of the domestic work in the home, etc., and so on. And that is because the capitalism do rely on the one hand, the family as an institution to take care of children, to take care of elderly, or the kind of like the social domestic needs that needs to be done, basically. And they can use that as a way to as well, then we can let you work less, basically, and hold down wages and conditions for people.
Avoid paying for it, right? That's the thing. Because it's very expensive for them to provide free childcare and to provide canteens and provide, to pull women out of the home. And that's precisely the reason they're relying on.
Exactly. So they rely on these gender roles even more, and trying to how do you say it? They try to really manifest it in the system as much as possible, and they need it. But the second point that I wanted to make around like why capitalism needs oppression is also because it is their main tool to divide and rule the working class. It's useful for the capitalist to make different parts of the working class see each other as the main enemy, have women seeing men as the main enemy rather than seeing the capitalists and the system as the problem, basically. And you can see that, for example, these are ideas that are quite actually influenced within the left, etc. That for example, you can't understand women's oppression by only looking at class size. You have to have something different to explain it, and so on. And in 2018, there was this big march that they were going to do in Spain, like the organizer proposed a women's strike, and it was to kind of like combat a lot of sexualized violence and harassment at workplaces and so on. And what the organizers were saying, like, actually, only women should go out and strike. The men should do the work of the women or stay in the factories and so on. And actually, what happened was that they promoted for men to act as strike breakers, and not seeing it as like men and women has a united struggle that they can carry out, basically. But instead, they were kind of like enforcing this thing that only women can struggle for women's issues and so on, and cannot align themselves with men on those questions. So you can see it's like it has a devastating impact actually on the struggle as a whole. But you can also see it in all of how the ruling class uses culture war to whip up things and making these kind of like divisions within the working class sharper, basically, so that they don't bother with what the capitalists are doing, basically.
And like, look, you spoke a lot about like struggle and how in the example of 2018 how that policy like divided things and made men as strike breakers, because at the end of the day, that is what we're interested in. That is the metric by which we are measuring how far do these ideas actually lead to the liberation of women, because we know that a struggle is necessary, and we are interested in what will move that forward. What we are not interested in is endless description of what oppression is. There is a very distinct difference between describing oppression and explaining it. And that is where this kind of a lot of blurriness comes into the picture, because people think that it's radical to just describe the 1,001 ways in which oppression manifests itself, and even women's oppression. There are so many different aspects to women's oppression under capitalism that have developed over years, and you can describe that in a lot of detail, and some people do, and that's fine and that's good. But that's not the role of a revolutionary party and what communists are interested in and what we're trying to do. And I say that because when you were describing the ways in which capitalism oppresses women, you spoke a lot obviously about the private domestic labor in the home, which again, just a throwback to the Bolsheviks, that's why they identified that and built those mass canteens and laundrettes, because they were generally trying to free women from the home, also so that they could be involved in politics, and at that time involved in the construction of a socialist society, because we understand that socialism needs democracy, needs mass participation, right? And so there's a very different way in which we approach it and we understand it. And it's rooted in understanding where it comes from and explaining a route forward.
I had a thing to just intervene on that, because like even Lenin, he was saying that the Russian Revolution would never have been successful had it not been that men and women actually united in the February Revolution, but then also later, obviously, during the October Revolutions and so on. That unity within the working class is absolutely necessary for a successful socialist revolution. Like women or working women as a group cannot overthrow capitalism. Men as a group within the working class cannot by themselves overthrow capitalism. Or like, black people on their own cannot overthrow capitalism. You need a united struggle. And that is because that when you're part of the working class, you have a very specific role in society. You can threaten the boss's profits. And threaten the whole system, basically. You can hold the whole system to a standstill. You can't do that if you just, isolated in a certain group who only promotes separatist movements and so on. And I think also is an important point to make as well, like this whole thing of like, of having this thing of making women see men as the enemy opens up the door for class collaboration. So what you have, for example, is a lot of feminists talking about, we just need to unite women as a group, no matter what class you come from. And, it's unite with the Beyoncés or the Kardashians. Exactly. But the thing is as well, like these capitalist bosses, I think you talked about this before, they will never, ever, they might struggle for their own personal, individual liberation, but they would never struggle for the whole women's liberation, which is also, including women from the working class, because at the end of the day, that will threaten their profits. And there is a material interest for female capitalists to maintain oppression, as it is to, because it's used to exploit workers as a whole much more effective, basically.
Yeah, that's so important. And to present the personal victory or the personal advancement of bourgeois women as an advancement for all women is a very pernicious, dangerous thing. And it flattens everything. It flattens the movement. And as you say, it presents it as though it's a struggle of all women against all men. But having said all that, we've spoken about the need for a united struggle. But I can imagine someone listening to this and thinking, hey, that sounds really great in the abstract, but what does that actually mean when it can feel like there is a war between men and women, or it can feel like there is a lot of misogyny or a lot of open violence, not just in rhetoric and language, but real material violence against women today. And you have the rise of figures like Andrew Tate, for example, who is a promoter of really dangerous, disgusting, horrible views of like the role of women in society and promoting them, generally speaking, as sexual objects or as, there to rear children and a whole host of different things. We can't, go into describe everything that Andrew Tate has ever said about women. But nevertheless, he's become quite prominent and he has support. He has support from a lot of young men. And so it's hard. So, where do we go from that? And I would say the first thing is you have to understand how or why someone like that has support rather than just kind of look at it and despair. Because if you don't understand it, then you are going to despair and you are going to believe that there is an inevitable clash between men and women that can never be overcome. And that is not true. Andrew Tate has popularity partly because he's gone into this generalized vacuum in society. We say this a lot. There is a huge crisis of capitalism. There's a crisis in culture. There's a crisis on the political front, and there's a lot of anger, and there's also a lot of alienation, and there's no real expression for that anywhere. And Andrew Tate, as vulgar as he is able to tap into also an anger that people maybe haven't been able to articulate for a long time towards the liberals and towards the liberal establishment. And he says, these guys have failed you. And actually, you're worse off, but this is how you can make money. It's by doing it in this way. And this is how you can be a man. And this is how you can have identity in a world in which that is increasingly difficult to do. And that is what he's speaking to. And he enters and he points out, and it's not just about Andrew Tate as an individual. What we're talking about here is what do people like Andrew Tate represent, which is they touch on a nerve, which is real disgust at the liberal establishment, at the Hillary Clintons of the world and the Kamala Harrises of the world, who pantomime this kind of liberatory image whilst not doing anything to advance the cause for the people they claim to represent, and at the same time making things worse for everyone. That has produced a lot of anger, and Andrew Tate is a distorted reflection of that. He is disgusting. He's a reactionary. But you have to understand why is it at this moment that Andrew Tate has suddenly become popular? It's because of this generalized kind of crisis.
I feel like that this is also kind of a point to make about, say the popularity of Farage, the popularity of Trump. It's not like all of these people, all of the supporters suddenly hate women or are sexist or are racist or whatever. I feel like it's of course, like with Andrew Tate, it's a bit of a different figure, but I feel like it's part of this entire sort of shift or this mood that exists of just anti-establishment, and this whole feeling of being pushed through the media like, oh, it's just like white men are a problem, or immigrants are a problem, or this is a problem. And just it feeds into like, there's a crisis in society. The left have done nothing. They're completely weak. They have no backbone. They're not standing up truly for what they believe, because actually they don't think really they could improve anything. Whilst Trump and Farage speak with such conviction, and they have such an anti-establishment anger that they represent. That is just, it's tapping into this vacuum that exists where the actual radical left is completely absent to really give a real solution or real answers. And so, it's not something to be completely, demoralized by, or like, I don't know, just like being a bit desperate about where things are going. I think it's actually a real reflection of just the true crisis we are in, and how the right wing is, tapping into this anger. But equally, the left could do the same and actually win over loads of people if there was a true alternative, right? And real answers provided to people of what they feel in society.
And like, while they don't, the left don't really have any ideas of like how to fight the oppression, a lot of them are kind of also just trying to look for shortcuts and just say, well, can't we just, sort out the women's oppression within capitalism, And they point to countries like Sweden, like Denmark, Norway, where you have had big welfare states being built and so on. And you have, obviously, like, I don't know, I'm from Sweden, so I've seen, like, there's obviously like a certain reforms that had huge impact on women's lives that was being brought in after the Second World War. You had obviously like free healthcare, you had free, schools, childcare, free education within universities. You had a massive expansions of the social and public services that was taking place. But the thing is as well, like this was not just a political choice that the politicians made, and so or just came out of like morally thinking like, oh yeah, we're so much more progressive than everyone else. Let's just build a nice public service and free up women a little bit more. No, obviously that was not the case, because this is a time in history which is very much an exemption in capitalist history, where you come out from the war, Sweden being neutral. It's like, they have a massive chance. The capitalists see this, yes, we can help build up Europe and make loads of money. So they have a lot of export into Europe, etc. And the capitalists in Sweden, they needed to expand the workforce. They needed women to come into the workforce. And in order to do so, they also needed to free up women from the domestic houseworks and so on. And it's not like they, that was like a out of being kind to women that they did that. They did so for their own specific interest in terms of like increasing their massive profits that was going to come, and at the same time, it was not just given freely. There was also an uptick in class struggle that was taking place in places like Sweden and so on. Massive class struggle that was really trying to push for these reforms, basically. So these reforms, they were won on the back of the working class coming onto the scene and really trying to push for this, and that's the thing, like. And with having a more expanded welfare system, it did have a very good impact on many women, but also it made women more independently financially and so on. And actually those material factors, they have a very important impact on how men and women see each other and how they relate to each other. So you have seen a certain like development of equality in places like Scandinavia during that period, compared to what it was like 100 years ago in Sweden. Like there was a massive change in gender norms and so on, etc. But I would not say that women's oppression has disappeared from Sweden. Under no circumstance would we say that oppression is gone. It still exists and still very real, and etc. And the fact is as well, since the 1990s, you have had, with the economic crisis that came then, a constant attack on the welfare state in Sweden. So a lot of these gains that was brought in the 1950s have been lost. And you had over 100,000 jobs being lost within the public sector. I used to work in the nurseries in Sweden. And when I was speaking to my older colleagues who had, been there for a couple of decades and see what it's like, they could really see like how the impact that it had on nurseries, going from having classes of 12 children, a lot of staff, to where I was working, you had 24 children in one classroom with 2.5 teachers trying to take care of this. There's been massive cuts, massive impact on hospitals, all of these things. And that is obviously increasing the burden on women in Sweden massively, because these public services can no longer take on that responsibility anymore. And right now you're seeing a lot of women having to actually seeing their gains being taken away from them. It's the fact that you had a bit more equality in Sweden. It does not come from any moral thing from them. And actually, where you can see like the hypocrisy around Western imperialism, where like they say, Western values are so nice and so progressive, but in countries like I don't know, like what would you say? We go to Afghanistan to save the women, or all of these kind of things. Actually, because that the US and Western imperialism completely destroyed those regions. That has had obviously an impact on women's life completely.
I agree, because I think that's the thing. Like, there is this abstract notion that there exists some sort of like moral Western values, whilst I would say like they have been involved in completely destroying, the position of women in these countries. And I think like the main thing is, of course, today you see that in Palestine, right? Like, Britain and the US have completely destroyed these countries, whilst talking about, with Biden and whatever, talking about so-called like, liberating people and improving conditions and all of this sort of stuff. And this vile hypocrisy is so clear. And actually, I would say that's quite clear for a lot of people today. Like, they see this disgusting hypocrisy about talking about, liberating women, taking care of children, taking care of like peace or whatever. And then at the same time, finding obviously billions of pounds to just, drop bombs on or support Israel, essentially, in dropping bombs on Palestine, right? Killing millions and thousands of children and women, right? I think it's quite obvious for, I think, a lot of people like that. These are not the people that actually care, about the women's question or about children or all of this sort of stuff.
Like, we've spoken about this kind of the shattering of liberalism, and in general is kind of a process that's taking place. And as you've just said, like, the main thing to say is these people do not care. They're hypocrites. They might, in some instances, talk about women and the oppression of women as a mask for what they're really trying to do. But it is a lie. And it's totally false. And we have to point that out. Western values, promotion of democracy, it's all tied up in this. But all of that is really, it's being exposed above all in Palestine.
Sorry.
No, go.
I was just going to say, it is exposed, obviously not like on a global scale, right? And I think that's the main thing, like in Scandinavia, in Europe, in the US, in Latin America, in of course, like in Africa, everywhere where you look, women's conditions have not improved. And in fact, in most cases, I think it's like 1 in 3 countries, I believe, like nothing has actually improved for women at all. And actually in over 18 countries, if I'm correct, things have actually gotten a lot worse, like countries like in Venezuela, South Africa, of course, Afghanistan. This is like a global crisis, which again, it's not a coincidence. This comes at a time of capitalist crisis, right? A deep capitalist crisis. And it's therefore always like women who are sort of being forced to bear the brunt of the crisis. We saw that during COVID, actually. We saw how women were immediately, laid off or in such horrible, precarious work conditions. They were the ones being immediately, responsible for childcare in the home. It's all like what capitalism is about. Like, it's about basically pulling women in and out of the workplace as they please, as they please. And I think that is the thing, like, as soon as there is some sort of boom of capitalism, which we obviously haven't seen for ages, then women are pulled, like we've seen in Scandinavia, like their conditions improved and things are sort of better. But as soon as it hits crisis, everything is taken away. Everything is just like thrown back, and actually we're making a regression essentially in women's development. Because this website that's all about women's equality and stuff, like it's called Focus 2030 or something. They were saying, oh well, at the rate that we are progressing right now, we might achieve women's liberation or like women's equality in 131 years or something like this. It's complete, it's like way too long, first of all, and second of all, that's not how it works. Like as I just explained, like this isn't a linear progress to women's equality. This is all about, you know, capitalism, first of all, needing this, as Lotta just explained, needing oppression, needing exploitation to obviously ensure their profits and their interest, to divide and rule and all of this sort of stuff. But capitalism is also in such a crisis. How would it ever be able to afford real conditions for, you know, real liberating conditions for women that we talked about, you know, the canteens, the childcare, the equal pay, all of this sort of stuff. It's simply impossible for this system to provide that, which is why we obviously are saying, like, this isn't something we just have to fight for, like, piecemeal by piecemeal. This requires an entire revolutionary change, essentially, to the system.
And I don't think that revolutionary change is something that is a million miles away. Because look, what you've just described explains why I would argue that today young women are more politicized than they have been for like a whole period. Young people in general, and people in general by extension, but then, you know, all this sense of what we're focusing on. There is a serious politicization taking place amongst young women today because of the crisis of capitalism, because of the attack on their rights, abortion, and so on and so forth, but also this generalized process. And I think there's a politicization, but there's also just a lot of anger. And you see that expressed culturally, and even in music and musicians and so on and so forth. And what I kind of want to say is, like, that it's so understandable, right? But that anger can go in lots of different directions because there is a lot of confused ideas out there, a lot of confused feminist ideas that we would disagree with. And we are here to put forward the communist position, to say to you, like, this is the solution. This is where you're going to find the agency that you need to actually go about changing things. And I was thinking about this viral TikTok. I keep talking about viral TikTok moments. There's this like famous question that like young women were being asked in the street, and they stop a young woman. They say, like, would you rather be in a forest with a man or a bear? And like all of the women say bear. They always pick the bear, right? Not because I don't think it's a bit of a joke. But they're trying to speak to, it's a protest. They're trying to say, yeah, look, all this violence, look at all this stuff that is happening to women in society, and we are sick of it, and we want to do something about it. And yeah, you know, Andrew Tate, and there's this kind of like sense sometimes of being under attack. And it's very hard as an individual to make sense of all of that. In fact, you can't. And like where you will end up is believing that you cannot ever trust any men or anything like this. And what we're explaining and what we're here to say is first of all, the best way to make sense of things is to have a theory, have an understanding of the world. And that is what Marxism gives us in terms of knowing where does the oppression of women come from in the first place. And then try and do something about it. Right? And it's not to say that it's an easy thing, but it's to make that next step is to overcome. And there's a lot of forces in bourgeois culture and society that makes women like not involved in politics or fearful to speak out and all this kind of stuff. But we're not interested in just these kind of individualistic things. The best way to have agency is to come together in a collective way. And that's what communism is about. That's what Marxism is about.
I mean, history has proven that all gains for women, like all major ones, has been done through revolutionary movements. It's not a coincidence that countries like Britain, Germany, Sweden got women's suffrage a year or so later after the Russian Revolution. And obviously that was because in these countries you had revolutionary movements boiling over, and the capitalists was like, oh shit, we need to give something to kind of hold things back. And that's the thing, like class struggle is what is bringing like our like reforms forward and so on. And like I think sometimes you hear like how, oh yeah, you Marxists, you just think that we can wait until the Russian the Russian Revolution until the revolution. You just wait until the revolution is done and so on. But that's obviously not the case. We would support any reform, whether doesn't matter whether the capitalists can afford it or not. We would support more housing. We would support better healthcare. We would support more childcare, free childcare for high quality, like public services and all of these things for equal pay today. But the point is, we don't limit ourselves to what is possible within capitalism. Obviously, all of these reforms, they aren't possible within capitalism because of the crisis. And we have to link that in order for us to truly make sure that these reforms are being brought into life. We also need to fight against the system that is holding it back, basically. So I think
and where are these reforms even? Like as in, like we would gladly support it, but there is literally no alternative. There is no left-wing party that actually speak about those conditions, right? They limit themselves to representation, quotas, that sort of stuff. But there is no, if there was a genuine fight, for actually improving and advancing the class struggle on that basis, then definitely like that would be something to put forward. But you can see such a crisis in that on that front. Like there are literally no answers.
But I guess as well, like also it is in the daily struggle for improvements that is actually giving the working class practice in terms of how to actually carry out the united struggle and so on. I think that's like a point to make. Like we're not just waiting around for the revolution to happen and then the day after, job done. But the point is as well, like we always have to be true and say the truth. That like if you want a real emancipation for women, for all oppressed people, you have to also struggle against the class society, basically.
I would also say, like, what Fiona was saying is also, like, quite key. Like, a lot of women do feel sort of in danger, as in, like, they do feel unsafe, and they have a deep distrust of men, and that's definitely the case. Of course, not without reason, because we've seen, like, just killings of women, like in this country. Of course, so much, you have like a femicides basically taking place elsewhere in Latin America and all of this sort of stuff. There's a huge distortion created, obviously, by the system, like between men and women. But I think like that is the thing, like, these sort of things cannot just be changed, like, like speaking to men and trying to change their view of like, that's too much of a task to achieve. Actually, what we see is precisely through, what Lotta was saying, like through these movements, through essentially class struggle, through mass, like collaboration of the working class to achieve a common interest, that where like the whole consciousness shifts on a mass scale, not just about where the power lies, right? Which is of course key, like power of the working class that they have, sort of like that comes sort of about, when you're fighting for what you want to change. But also they realize who are the actual enemies and who are sort of their friends in that sense, right? And who they need in order to achieve it. And so during revolutionary periods, like the Russian Revolution, like the Arab Spring, like during the Sudanese revolution in, was it 2018, 2019? You saw loads and loads of women saying, I've never felt so safe as being, part of this revolution. Suddenly they actually gained like so much respect and so much like they've achieved sort of real equality. In fact, I mentioned this like every time like I sort of speak about the Arab Spring because it's so amazing. But like women who were in Egypt, as part of the revolution in 2011 on Tahrir Square, fighting for the fall of the Mubarak regime, women were so heavily mistreated back then, like, before, like they weren't even allowed to go out of the house. It was a real, oppressive, basically, environment. But at least 50% of the women, or 50% of the people were women who were there, which is actually already amazing. But second of all, also any men who were like bothering women there on the square or anything like that were publicly shamed and spray painted as abusers because they wanted to say like, you are literally sort of undermining what we're trying to achieve here. We need our common, fighters, and we couldn't achieve this without women being part of this, right? Suddenly, like, it's sort of like this dramatic shift in consciousness. That's the thing. That's what revolutions mean. It's like finally, like the real festival of the oppressed. Finally, they feel free. Finally, they are, having something where they feel like they are truly fighting, their oppressors and changing society, right? Yeah. That is what we're about, right? Like we know that this is something that is on the cards because, the working class is so extremely, sort of discontent with society and so angry. And of course, you will see much more movements and strike actions against this government and against, the whole system. But that is what eventually makes like people realize that all those lies of divide and rule and stuff will sort of fall apart. Which is of course an amazing sort of like I don't know, like an experience essentially to go through.
It reminds me of the quote by Marx. I think it's Marx that liberation is a historical, not a mental act. And that is what we're striving for, right? Cool. Well, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just like the point that the objective situation to freeing women has never been more favorable than what it is today. Like you compare it obviously with Russian Revolution, where the economic situation, we have to be clear, they were dire. Like, the Bolshevik trying to put in all of these gains for women in a time where they were facing civil war, where they were facing famine, where they were facing economic collapse and so on. And for those objective reasons, it wasn't possible to truly get rid of the material base for women's oppression. Yes, they put
Stalinism
in...
also.
Yeah, exactly. Like...
Destroyed it.
Yeah, definitely. So, and these canteen that they did put in place, they couldn't reach the quality to actually replace the things that could be done at home and so on. But you look at the things today, like you have all of the kind of resources. There's so much wealth in society. There's so much opportunities for us to completely free ourselves. Yeah. You have robots that could, do they can go from the shops and do your shopping, for example.
Robots. I said robots.
Me too.
Robot.
Putting robot to work.
The technology you have, you can basically automate so much stuff of the domestic housework, completely free up women. Yeah. So no one needs to do domestic housework, and you can lower the amount of time of working hours to like an absolute minimum. I don't know exactly how much, but with all of the AI, I can imagine you only need to work a couple of hours a week, The rest of the time, men and women can participate in governance of society, So the opportunities to completely liberate humanity, they are there. The question is like breaking with the barrier of private property and put it in control of the working class.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you both so much. And that is exactly what we're fighting for. And we want to invite as many people as possible to join us in that struggle, in that fight against capitalism, which is the only way to genuinely free women. I do want to just shout out a book by Engels, which is called The Origins of the Family, Private Property and the State, which also explains in a lot more detail where women's oppression comes from and the origins of the family, which is really important. So I'd recommend that if you want to know more about it. And also a point that Engels makes at the end, which is also that, it's not down to us today to dictate what future relations will look like, right? Loads of us are obviously very, horrified by the distorted nature that men and women have with each other under capitalism. And we obviously want to struggle against that, to free us from the conditions that do that, not to artificially create it ourselves today. And I think that is an important note to end on, right? We have to, not artificially kind of go forward with that. But thank you both so much.
Thank you.